So I'm here at my local Shinto Shrine. Well, that was neat. I don't know if that showed up on camera, but a little black butterfly just kind of fluttered around in front of me. Anyway, I'm here at my local Shinto Shrine, and it's my neighborhood shrine. It's about 15 minutes from my house. You can find one of these in just about any neighborhood in Japan. Not quite as elaborate as this. This is actually a very elaborate shrine, but they do exist in just about every neighborhood. It's a peaceful place, it's a mindful place, and it's where people go to pray. But it's not a church. Shintoism is probably one of the most misunderstood religions in the world. Some say it's not a religion at all. Some say it's a way of thinking that exists in nature, literally exists in nature. Let me put it this way. The gods, or as the Japanese say, kami is the Japanese word for God. God exists in nature. God exists in the trees. God exists in the grass and in the rocks and in the rivers. And in order for people to connect with that God or the gods, they worship nature. And that's the essence of it. So people come here to connect with nature. And you can see this in everyday walks of life in Japan. You take a look at a picture of a Japanese rock garden or a bonsai tree or a well-manicured lawn. You can see the respect that Japanese people have for nature. And you definitely feel it here when you visit a shrine like this. And behind me, this is the prayer portion, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. There's a bit of a process to it, and I hope I get it right. I want to be respectful. So anyway, yeah, this is my Shinto shrine, and this is Shintoism. Now these arches that you see at the entrance of most Shinto shrines, they're called tori, or gate. And they're meant to be the gate between the human world and the spiritual world. So when you enter through these gates and you walk this path is called the path of the gods towards the shrine, you're entering a sanctuary. So the tori is probably one of the most iconic symbols of Japan. So now you know what it is when you see pictures of it. The gateway to the spiritual world. Now you're probably wondering how old a place this is. I'm kind of wondering that myself. And I've been looking around for somebody who can give me some information, but I can't find anybody. It's just me here today, so I'm going to have to do a little detective work. And I apologize, my Japanese is not nearly good enough to read the kanji on these headstones. It's good enough that I can get some information, and I'll give that to you in a second. But first, a little bit of Japanese history. The progress of Japanese history is measured in eras or clusters of years called eras. We're currently living in the Reiwa era, the third year of the Reiwa era. That coincides with the emperor that is in power. I was born in the Showa era. You were probably born in the Showa era. World War II happened in the Showa era. One of my favorite periods of Japanese history is the Edo era. And the Edo era goes back about 600 years. It began in 1600 and it ran until 1868. And that is often known as the Golden Age of the Samurai. But I think the most famous and one of the most important eras in Japanese history is the Meiji era. And that began in 1868, and it ran until 1912. Now, this was a very interesting time in Japanese history because up until that point, Japan had pretty much closed its doors to foreigners. It was a very isolated island country, and it was very traditional and very pure. And then, as is usually the case with history, the foreigners came. First, it was the Americans in 1868. They knocked on the door and said, "We want in." And Japan was still very much a feudal society. It was not able to defend itself. So they opened their doors, and that began the decline of traditional Japan and the birth of modern Japan. Interestingly enough, it's also at this time that you see the decline of the samurai. If you watch Tom Cruise's The Last Samurai, you might get a good idea of the era that we're talking about. The Meiji era. Now, I mention the Meiji era because this gravestone in front of me, I can date it to the Meiji era. And I'll show you here. Now, as I said, I can't read a lot of this, but I can read this part here. This says Meiji. Now, this 3, that's a san, and this is ichi. So this is Meiji Sanjuichi. Meiji Sanjuichi is 31, so Meiji Sanjuichi, which means this gravestone came from the 31st year of the Meiji era. And the Meiji era began in 1868, so this gravestone dates to 1899. 1899. I wonder if this guy was the last samurai. Oh, the stories he could tell. One last thing that I wanted to talk about today was the word kami. I mentioned it before, and kami literally translated from Japanese to English, it means God. And it's a word that you've probably heard before and you just have forgotten, or maybe you haven't forgotten. It's actually the prefix for the larger word kamikaze. And kamikaze is a word that I'm sure you've heard. Kamikaze, the kamikaze was that pilot, or those pilots who willingly flew their airplanes into Allied naval vessels during World War II, willingly committed suicide for the cause of the war. Yeah. But anyway, kamikaze means divine wind, so that was the attack of the divine wind. The word itself goes back even further than that, though. It goes back to the 13th century when Kublai Khan and his Mongol raiders attacked Japan not once, but twice. And they lost not once, but twice. And why? Typhoons. Divine winds. Kamikaze. The wind did it.